have night sorry. We all have nightmares of monsters hiding under our beds or in the closet. As young children, we believe these fictional creatures are non-fictional. The imaginary becomes very real when the lights go out. I always had awful nightmares of vampires trying to break into my house to get my family. Luckily, I thought my blankie, which I still sleep with till this day, somehow made a force shield around my whole house when I hugged it as tightly as I could and told it to protect my family members. If I wasn't dreaming about vampires, then I was usually dreaming about strange swamp monsters coming from both the pool and the pond. Again, I would use my blankie to protect my family. When my blankie couldn't create the force shield, I would wake up to the horrific terror of my family members being terribly hurt. Screaming and crying, my parents always came to the rescue. Comforting me back to sleep, I knew the monsters weren't real and were just a part of my imagination. But when I was in the 4th grade at the Greenville school, my dreams shifted drastically for a short but terrifying stretch of time. My dreams changed from simply my imagination to something so horribly real that no parent could pretend it doesn't exist. These indelible nightmares of mine were the sad truth of death. I was having these reoccurring nightmares at night at a time when I was also pestered by feelings of self-hatred and self-doubt. This whole period is a bit of a blur, and the significant events blend together. But I wanted to share it today because it has shaped who I am, even though it's a part of me that I have never told anyone. I was born in New York City, and after a couple of years, my family and I moved to Glen Head, Long Island. New York is one of the greatest places to live, and I couldn't be more grateful to have grown up there. But it is also terribly tough, especially for a little girl who is awfully insecure. Constantly spoken down to by my fellow peers, I quickly thought I needed to change myself in order to be seen as a cool kid. Many times, tears slowly flowed down my cheeks onto my pillow, but my dad was always there to comfort me. I would try to stop crying and catch my breath. Whatever, Dad, I'll never be a cool kid. I may have said that to try to convince myself and my dad I was okay, but I was not. Chicken skin was the one description of me during that time that still sticks in my brain. If you don't know what it means, it is really bumpy skin. I vividly remember a girl in my class for some reason asking everyone to see if she could feel his or her skin. I thought she would be in shock because my skin had never had a single pimple. Proudly, I gave her permission to touch my cheeks, and immediately I wish I had taken back that permission. She was shocked, all right, but because my skin was so bumpy. Her hand patted my face back and forth while she screamed to all the other kids that I had chicken skin. Still to this very day, I will rub my cheeks back and forth, desperately hoping that my skin is finally smooth, but it never is. My skin is a terrible insecurity of mine ever since that one tiny incident. Once I started focusing too much on what others thought in this period, every bad aspect of my life that should have been minuscule and impacted me in only the tiniest of ways made me hate myself even that much more. My judgment of myself became harder and harder. Body image has always been one of my undeniable insecurities. If you ever see me in the dining hall, you will rarely find me with a mug of ice cream and a warm brownie. Most likely, I will have a bowl of some assortment of vegetables and, of course, an apple. That's my dessert. This is what I choose to eat, and as hard as it is to understand, I think it's delicious. Ever since I was little, I chose vegetables and fruit over anything, except if there was fries, because sweet potato fries are my weakness. I wish I could say that my perception of my body is as healthy as what I eat. I actually like healthy food, but that made no difference. I hated myself for not measuring up to some unattainable standard that I had created in my head. But no matter how much weight I lose, I still consider myself larger than what I would like to be. My insecurities with my image began in 2nd grade. I was a genie. Yep. Now, as you can see, it is perhaps a somewhat risque costume for an adult, but me being a little girl, it's adorable. I was in love with this costume, but as I sat in my seat at our school's assembly, I looked down at my stomach. Seeing the roles I began to hate, I started tearing up. Thinking thinking that people were looking and making fun of me. Sorry. For my rolls of chub, right after assembly, I aggressively put on my baby blue cable knit button-down sweater and used it to cover my beloved costume the entire day. Too insecure to show anyone my favorite Halloween costume, and still to this day is my favorite costume. I felt hopeless and alone at such a young age. I wasn't pretty enough, I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't skinny enough, I wasn't cool enough. Sorry. No one knew how I felt. I was completely lost. And now we come to the darkest period, the period of my death dreams. Still lost. I began writing suicide letters, desperately writing down the painful thoughts I couldn't confide in with anyone. As the words continued to flow onto each piece of paper, the tears would run down my cheeks. Each word was ruined with a tear, but I continued to write. I was only 10, and I was writing about wanting to die because I was so miserable with the person I was. So much so that I didn't think anyone would miss me. I wasn't pretty enough, I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't skinny enough, I wasn't cool enough to be cared enough to be missed. This fixation with death and my misery was so intense that at one point, I clearly remember grabbing the bright red chair in my room, putting it against the mirror, and wrapping a bright blue peace sign scarf around my neck. I tightened the scarf, but I didn't put it on top of the door. I stared at myself in the eyes through my reflection in the mirror. My vision of myself became a blur as the tears distorted my vision. I realized I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. My suicide letters and desperate thoughts were a cry for help, a cry for reassurance that someone cared for me and would miss me. A little over a week ago, I showed my mom my speech and the part about my desperate misery, and I asked, "Do you remember this at all?" She looked in utter shock as tears started filling her eyes, and she said, "I definitely shut it out. I remember how terribly hard you were on yourself, no matter what we said, but not this." For all these years, I thought she knew about the letters in my desperation, but this is the first time she's ever heard about them. I guess I thought she knew about them because she's such a big part of the reason I stopped being haunted by death, even if she didn't know just how closely I was to considering it. In fact, she and my entire family are the reason I stopped thinking about dying and started thinking about surviving and even thriving. My family got me through that worst time, the blurry period of 4th and 5th grade, by being supportive and loving. As I moved through middle school and high school, I learned more about my family's story, which is what has confirmed and strengthened my awareness that I will always choose life, even if I still struggle with these stubborn insecurities. I am the oldest of 3. I have 2 younger brothers who are fraternal twins, Will and Trace. They are now 16. My mom, Elizabeth Munson, and my dad, Robert von Stade, are the 2 greatest parents I could ask for. My mom has had an especially hard life, but no one would ever know that because of her contagious smile and incredibly cute gestures, like her aggressive waving. Seriously, you can be right next to her, and she'll actually start waving, and it's really embarrassing, but I absolutely love it. I've never met someone who doesn't love her. My mom was the youngest of 4 children, 1 sister and 2 brothers, Kate, Tony, and George. As I've learned about their stories, I've learned that they have had struggles similar to my own. My mother got overly stressed out in boarding school, but then at one point she thought, "I'm making myself crazy with this stuff. Life is too short. I have to relax and not be so flipped out about things." And so she was able to come back from the edge and has been able to continually live fully despite tragedies in her life. One of these tragedies involved my uncle Tony. Tony graduated from Yale and had been in the Navy. He had served on an aircraft carrier that had been in the envoy of ships that went to pick up the astronauts from one of the early manned spaceships. space flights. He was going to a top-tier business school in the fall of 1964 and was getting married to a wonderful woman in that fall as well. An engagement announcement had even appeared in the New York Times. My mother was going to be a flower girl. She was almost 8 years old when Tony shot himself one morning in April of 1964. After this early tragedy, both my mom's parents died by the time she was in law school in her 20s. As my mother was cleaning out the house, she found a metal art supply in the back of the closet. In it was a copy of the letter Tony had written to her parents before he died by suicide. In the letter, which neither of her surviving siblings had seen either, her brother said how sorry he was for what he was about to do. He said how his fiancée was too good for him. An angel, he called her. And that he just couldn't live up to the standards he had set for himself. Both his siblings had already had serious psychological breakdowns by then, but no one had anticipated that Tony was afflicted by the same curse. Those feelings sound like my 10-year-old self, and they are hard to hear about, but I am more like my mom, and so I am lucky. Uncle George also had serious breakdowns. He was brilliant. He was a poet. He was troubled. He met his wife Vicky at the Institute of Living in Hartford, where both were patients, due to their manic depressive, now called bipolar. George told my mom that he had once gone to see a girlfriend and it ended up shearing the doors off his car and then stepping out of the car as it was going 60 miles per hour while he got to her house. When George was in an assisted living facility and the staff sent us to visit him, he kissed my mom on the lips as we left, saying, "I have a 1,000-year-old disease." The nurse outside then handed my mom 2 bottles of Purell, saying that George had a serious contagious staph infection and that she should wash all of us kids off with the Purell. None of us got infected, but it wasn't for lack of exposure. My mom used to get upset on phone calls with George, and all of this scared us kids. We couldn't really understand what all was going on. We would say, "Why do you call that crazy man?" She would say, "Because he's my brother." And that has stuck with me. That level of caring, that level of understanding. George died on April 14th, 2012, a year before I arrived to Brooks. Coming to Brooks as a freshman, I was tremendously uncomfortable with the person I was. I wanted to come in being the cool freshman girl. It was a new start for me, except I had come with Russell Byers, the obnoxious and outgoing new guy with fantastic taste of designer and thrift store clothing. He made the transition a whole lot easier for me. Yes, I had periods of times when I hated being at school and desperately missed home. But after a couple of months, I found some of my closest friends, who I hope to keep in contact with my entire life. Whether they were seniors, juniors, sophomores, or freshmen, they were there for me. I felt welcomed. I felt like people cared about me. I felt as if I would be missed. And I had the perspective of knowing that even in my insecurities, I am anchored in life. I have experienced self-hatred and self-doubt how it can take me, and I have watched the toll on a family, and I refuse to let any insecurities take so much away from me again. Beyond the love of my family and the power of their story, I think what helped me get healthier and embrace living was knowing that other people deal with heavy things too. I have friends who have lost siblings, parents, aunts, uncles, and friends, some by suicide, accident, or illness. But what has made the difference for me has been the people who are willing to acknowledge that life isn't always easy or fun. Even though I've never shared this story with anyone before this moment, it matters to me that others are willing to share their stories. That makes things more bearable for me and has enabled me to overcome my silence. And that's why I'm sharing this now. I know for those of you who are younger, it may seem like the seniors have it all together. But standing up here in front of all of you today, I, Katherine von Stade, will tell you that I am still insecure and I am still terribly hard on myself. I am still not pretty enough. I'm still not smart enough, I'm still not skinny enough, and I'm still not cool enough. But whatever. I'm a freak, a loser, an awkward girl who still has chicken skin, chub chub, nightmares of the future, and monsters, and I still clutch my tattered blankie to my body in order to fall asleep. And I know I am not alone and that people care. And now, I am the girl who's finally proud enough to tell you all of this. Thank you.